The air in the courtroom was thick, like a storm waiting to break. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the polished mahogany bench where Judge Reynolds sat, fingers steepled, expression unreadable. The scent of old paper and cheap cologne clung to the room, mingling with the faint hum of whispers from the gallery. A gavel slammed. Sharp. Absolute. Case dismissed. Silence. A tense, unnatural silence. The judge barely glanced at the man standing before him. Just another name on a docket. Another case brushed aside. He sighed, already moving to the next file. But the veteran, rigid, still as stone, did not move. He simply stood there, hands clasped behind his back, his gaze locked on the judge. Unwavering, calculated. Then, in a voice too calm, too deliberate, he spoke. "Your Honor, are you sure about that?" A flicker of something crossed the judge's face. Annoyance, maybe. A warning. He exhaled through his nose. "You're dismissed, Mr. Carter. You may leave." But Carter didn't leave. Instead, he reached into his jacket. Slow. Measured. The bailiff's hand twitched toward his holster. A few people in the gallery leaned forward. The air felt different now. Charged. Then Carter placed a single laminated card on the defense table. The emblem gleamed under the courtroom lights. Bold. Unmistakable. The room changed in an instant. The judge's breath hitched. His fingers tightened around his gavel. And for the first time that day, he froze. A muscle in Judge Reynolds' jaw twitched. He leaned forward, squinting at the laminated card as if hoping he'd read it wrong. The emblem, the Pentagon's insignia, stared back at him. Cold and undeniable. His expression hardened. "What exactly is this supposed to mean, Mr. Carter?" His voice was steady, but there was something else now. A fracture beneath the surface. Carter tilted his head, just slightly. "It means you just dismissed a case involving someone with level 5 Pentagon clearance." His voice was smooth, controlled. The courtroom remained deathly still. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably. Even the clerk, usually indifferent, had stopped typing. Judge Reynolds scoffed, but it came a second too late. Forced. "Pentagon clearance?" He let out a short, dismissive laugh. "And I suppose you think that changes something?" He shook his head, feigning amusement. "I don't know what game you're playing, but flashing some government badge doesn't mean you're above the law." Carter didn't flinch. "Neither are you." A beat. The judge's fingers curled around his gavel, knuckles paling. "Your case had no merit, Mr. Carter. That's why I dismissed it. You should be grateful I didn't entertain it any further." Carter took a slow step forward. Not threatening, just enough to own the space. "I think we both know that's not why you dismissed it." The judge's smirk faltered. His throat bobbed in a slow, reluctant swallow. Something was shifting, and for the first time he felt it. Judge Reynolds shifted in his seat, adjusting his robe as if the fabric had suddenly become constricting. His smirk was gone, replaced by something colder. Harder. "Let me guess," he said, tapping his gavel against the bench. Once, twice. "You think dropping a fancy clearance level in my courtroom will intimidate me? That I'll suddenly overturn my ruling?" A dry chuckle. "I don't answer to government theatrics, Mr. Carter. Your case is over." Carter exhaled through his nose, a breath, not quite a laugh. "That's an interesting choice of words. Over." Reynolds narrowed his eyes. "Excuse me?" Carter moved, just slightly, reaching into his pocket. This time, the bailiff's hand fully gripped his holster. The tension snapped like a wire stretched too thin. Carter, unfazed, pulled out a folded piece of paper and placed it neatly on the defense table. No sudden movements, no emotion. The judge hesitated. Then, with a sharp exhale, he leaned forward and snatched the document. As his eyes scanned the page, the color drained from his face. The prosecutor, watching from the other side of the courtroom, frowned. "Your Honor?" Reynolds didn't answer. His hand trembled slightly as he flipped to the second page. Carter clasped his hands behind his back, posture unreadably rigid. "That document is a classified authorization request, dated 4 months ago." His voice was unnervingly level. "It was sent directly to your office, but according to court records, you never filed it." A ripple went through the courtroom, whispers, uneasy glances. The prosecutor stiffened. The bailiff took a step closer to the bench. Judge Reynolds' breathing had changed, short, uneven. His fingers tightened around the paper, and then, just for a second, his gaze flicked toward the exit, like a man considering his escape. The trap is tightening. Ready to move into the major twist? Power shift? The judge's fingers twitched, smudging the ink on the page as he clenched it tighter. His throat bobbed in a dry swallow. Carter watched, waiting. Calculated. Then softly, almost like a whisper, he spoke. "That document isn't just proof of a deliberately buried request." A pause. "It's a direct order from the Pentagon's Internal Affairs Division." A single second of absolute silence. Then, chaos. The prosecutor jolted upright. A juror's pen slipped from their fingers, clattering against the table. The bailiff's posture shifted, his hand still hovering near his holster. But now, it wasn't aimed at Carter. Judge Reynolds knew. And worse, everyone else did too. The sweat was visible now, glistening at his temple. His breaths came shallow. His fingers trembled as they gripped the paper like a lifeline. Carter took a slow step closer. His voice didn't rise, didn't waver. "The Pentagon doesn't issue these requests lightly, Your Honor?" His eyes locked onto Reynolds, pinning him in place. "And they don't take kindly to obstruction." The judge opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His lips parted, closed, then parted again. For the first time in his career, he had no words. And Carter? He just smiled. Judge Reynolds' breath was uneven now, his grip on the paper so tight it crumpled at the edges. The courtroom wasn't his anymore. It belonged to Carter. The prosecutor cleared his throat, stepping forward cautiously. "Your Honor, is this true?" His voice was measured, but his eyes, held something else. Suspicion, recognition. Reynolds didn't answer, couldn't. The bailiff's radio crackled to life. A static-filled voice cut through the silence. "Federal agents en route. ETA 2 minutes." Reynolds' head snapped up. 2 minutes. 2 minutes before the doors swung open, before everything he'd spent decades building crumbled beneath him. Carter exhaled, slow and deliberate. He turned slightly, adjusting his jacket, then met Reynolds' eyes with a gaze that saw straight through him. "You dismissed my case," he said, voice as steady as ever. "Now it's your name on the docket." A beat. Reynolds paled. The gavel slipped from his grasp, landing on the bench with a hollow, final sound. Carter nodded once, then, without another word, turned and walked out. Behind him, the heavy courtroom doors creaked open, and Judge Reynolds finally ran out of time. Fade to black. That's the mic drop. Let me know if you need refinements or if we're locked and loaded for production. Blast off.